Hello, we're live. Hope this holds out. Have my troubles with AT&T, so we'll see how this goes. Today I got a bunch of questions from writer viewers or viewer writers, and think I'm going to go through them. The first question was about foreshadowing. So we have a question on foreshadowing, questions on flashbacks, questions on love scenes, on structure, description. So we'll see, but we'll start with foreshadowing and flashbacks because they both seem to have they have much in common. Foreshadowing, getting the reader prepared for events that are to come. Oh, the garbage truck is here, right on time. Thank you very much. City sanitation. Well, at least there's infrastructure, I guess. So, past and future, and putting the reader somewhere in between. Okay, so foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is important for a reader because our most pleasure in finding something out or finding something that's going to that's something that happens in a book is when we know something is going to happen, but we don't know what. So we're waiting and waiting and waiting, and then whatever it is happens, and there is a certain kind of satisfaction that comes from fulfilling of something that's been foreshadowed. Surprise is never as effective in fiction as is suspense, which is the idea that something's going to happen and the reader is watching for it. So foreshadowing is what makes that happen. And the worst kind of heavy-handed foreshadowing, as we have all read in different books, is the foreshadowing of what she didn't know was, or what was going to happen. She had no idea what was soon to befall her. That's like, that's Victorian melodrama. We do not want to do this. We want to be as subtle as we can, as effective as we can with our foreshadowing. Often you do it with the setting. That's why I hit landscape so hard. Weather, description of objects, but especially landscape is wonderful for setting a mood and foreshadowing events to come in a novel or in a short story. So I thought I would show you a couple of instances of foreshadowing in fiction, which gives you an example of how great authors handle foreshadowing. So the first one is an opening of a Fitzgerald story. After dark on Saturday, one could stand on the first tee of the golf course and see the country club windows as a yellow expanse over a very black and wavy ocean. This is like a perfect Fitzgerald opening. So you stand on the first tee of the golf course after dark on Saturday and see the country club windows as a yellow expanse over a very black and wavy ocean. So what is that foreshadowing when you think about that? What's our expectation of the story? So we have someone in the dark on a golf course looking at a country club windows that are lit up, very far away, lit up. We get so much information from that short sentence. What is our expectation? There's a time, a place, a color, a familiarity with country club life. So it's somebody standing, he knows he's on the first tee How would he know that? The reader gets a subtle feeling of this familiarity with the terrain because I'm on the first tee. But I'm not inside the country club with the lit up windows, so I'm an insider outsider. It foreshadows who the character is. It foreshadows the yearning to be inside where those windows are, and it's like you're across the ocean, and the only thing that's lit, the only thing that's going to save you is that ocean liner, if you could only reach it. That's foreshadowing. That's elegant foreshadowing, as opposed to what she didn't know, or soon she would rue her words, that's like heavy-handed. Use the landscape. It's the best way of conveying mood. The weather is a wonderful way of conveying mood and foreshadowing future events. Here's another one that I believe this is a Joyce Carol Oates story, just by setting. I'm not quite sure. The raw November afternoon sky moved from south to north over the heads of the two children in a cold and muscular dance of digestion. So here we have the landscape about to digest these two children who are unaware of this. For a storm to move from south to north is kind of unnatural. It usually moves from north to south. So it's this weird storm that's come up, and it's going to eat these children. There's foreshadowing, but very elegant. It's using the landscape for foreshadowing, which is the best place it could be. You can also get a lot of character take on things by the way a character describes the landscape. But the weather will always help you set up an expectation. It's foreshadowing is about setting up expectations in the reader that then they wait to see that paid off. So a storm sets up a different expectation in the reader than a meticulous preparation for a trip. That's why it's so important to learn how to describe landscape and richly, so that you can use it when you're foreshadowing. But avoid the heavy-handed, foreshadowing. Years in the future, she will come to regret this. It's like, oh, brother. That's kind of putting your thumb on the scale. You've got to let the reader build the expectation rather than it's like American films, not all of them, of course, I'm not putting down American films, but commercial American films tend to be very heavy-handed. If there's a clue, you're going to get the close-up, extreme close-up of the key falling under the carpet. It's like, oh, for Christ's sake, you always want to be elegant. You always want to, it's the hidden paw that you're looking for when it comes to foreshadowing. You don't broadcast it. So then it sets a mood. Foreshadowing, it's a mood. You set a mood. There's a wonderful exercise that I sometimes give about setting up expectations through place, which is to describe a location, just in one location in your mind, and describe it in two ways. Describe it, this is the house my lover lives in, and then this is the house my blackmailer lives in. Same house, same everything, but described very, very differently. Then you don't mention the lover or the blackmailer. You just describe the house and the light and all that, and see if you can set up that foreshadowing. So if you want to if it's a story about divorce, and you have a husband and wife sitting at a table in, say, Italy. Maybe they're on vacation. How would you indicate that all is not well in this couple, so the dialogue doesn't have to carry it all, that the other elements, we've talked about dialogue, so the other elements of the scene carry their weight? You can do it by somebody having an accident right in front of them, driving along merrily, and then poof, that's definitely foreshadows something not good happening to those people. And then, or you can do it the opposite way. You can have a young couple in love, arm in arm, hand in hand, walking by them as they, drink their espressos and read the paper and don't talk to each other. So use the landscape. That's for foreshadowing. That's my big bit of advice for the foreshadowing question. Then there is a related question of why now. That's something, if you're ever in workshop, people will ask you, why now? Why is this happening now? Why is this question coming now? Because fiction is all about change. If you're in the midst of stasis that's going to remain static, things are timeless. It's just one more day or one more trip to the market. Stories are about today, why this day is different from all other days, just like the Passover questions, right? Why is this night different from all other nights? There's no story if it's not different. You can start out with the usual, but then something different happened. All stories have that. People have said that there are only two stories, which I hate that kind of reductivism, but teachers often use these as a little samplers or rules of thumb. Is there only two stories? A stranger came to town is one of them, and what was the other one? There are only two, and I can't remember the other one. But they're both, why is this different than all other days? You always have to go there. You're moving into a new town. You're learning something new. You're confronted with something new. Is always going to be the reason for the story. Then we have the question of flashbacks, and there are people who just despise flashbacks. Anybody who has film experience fights like crazy not to have a flashback. In film, it's considered extremely dated, just like voiceover is. In fiction, there are so many ways to dip into the past because a human being we live in memory more than we live in the present, as anybody, who is over the age of 10 can tell you, or even 10-year-old. People live in the past more than they live in the present. The present is just the tip of this great iceberg that is the human being. It's where the past interacts with the present. So flashbacks per se, and then you're back in the past. I mean, that's like cornball stuff. But we have to freely interact with the past in fiction. And you can do it simply. Somebody can have a bit of, in a live scene, real time, they can have a bit of dialogue and they remember when, blah, blah, blah happened and Jane borrowed that $1,000. Sorry, Jane. Is she expecting me to give it back? And then you go right back into the present. You can dip. You don't have to have a major flashback scene. You can just dip into the past anytime you want to, because there is no time in the interior world. It's all happening now. Psychologists will tell you that. I mean, the past is as present as the present is for us, and more so. So my big advice is if you're doing a bit of flashback, try not to go back more than a paragraph before you hook back into the present scene. I remember, Jane passes the gravy, and I remember a Thanksgiving past, and something happened specifically, some reason that this passing of the gravy boat recalled that other scene to mind, and then come back. And if it's a long flashback, keep coming back to the present scene. Keep telling us who we are and where we actually are. Don't I'm not going to make blanket statements, because for every statement I might say of, don't do that, there's some genius out there of you who is going to do it really well. And I'm going to go, yeah, you can do it. But rule of thumb, try not to just be in a present scene and then disappear into some past experience and just leave us floating there. But you can have somebody thinking about the past, which is a flashback. You could have somebody thinking about the past, even going into the scene. And then the waitress comes and pours you some coffee as you're thinking about it. Oh, I'm back in real reality. And then you can go back again, back and forth. But usually I like to have some link in a present story that provokes the flashback. It doesn't come, out of the blue. It's usually linked to something that's happening in the present. I think that to have a live scene in the past is, try to compress those scenes in the past, unless your book is like half set in the past, in which case you could just do a chapter break and have that scene from the past, and then have a break, and then have a scene from the present, and you don't have to segue back and forth. But generally speaking, notice what recalls the past. I'm reading this book, Paul Harding's Tinkers, and he handles time very well, going back and forth. Question your books when you're reading literature. Question how do they handle time? How do they handle whatever they're handling? That's why I mark up my books. I take notes on what I'm reading. Almost, if it's any good, I will take notes, because I want to see how they do it, not just sit there and eat it like Doritos. I want to interact with it in a deep way. And if somebody handles time well, you want to take a note from that. So the question on the flashback of a deceased character, well, you're going to have flashbacks. People, it doesn't matter if they're alive or dead, because they were alive at the time that you're remembering them. So it just takes something in the present to trip that. And then you can go back and recall that, but keep it as compressed as possible and to the point. Like, why are we remembering that? If a character's death is part of the present, don't do a standalone chapter necessarily. If it's a character remembering how someone died, that can be a flash, or they can be a character in a separate scene that has a double space. And you can do it in a fragmented way, going past to present. I think last time I talked about reading Carol Mazo's Ava, which is a dying person, so everything is the past, almost everything. But she brings us back to the present as well, even in a very modernist work. She will every once in a while come back to a nurse asking her something, or something like that. Wow, okay. So, what am I doing here? What's another thing I can write? How do you balance description, showing a character's point of view of the world, and too much? Okay, description, we are the character. If they're in POV, point of view, we are them. So we see what they see, and that's what we see, and that's it. And we see their thoughts. So descriptions showing a character's point of view of the world, how do you balance that? I think what you mean, how do you balance their observations of the world around them with their internal thoughts and their direct interaction with others in live dialogue scenes. I like the interior world. I like the exterior world. I like the writing from the senses. But the reader is reading both for the joyousness of the prose, the beautiful, the way a bit of prose holds the world, condenses the world, and what's going to happen next. So think of it as fishing. You got your line in, you're fishing away, and then you get something on the line. There's the reader. Hup! Got him. All right. Now, you can describe the world, you can take side trips, you can go internal, you can do all kinds of stuff as long as you can keep that fish on the line. You can let them play out, but you just have to, you only get as much play as you've got that fish hooked. So people will give you a certain amount of play to describe things, but if they feel it's not going anywhere, then you're losing your fish. So it's a dance between your description, your internals, you're creating the world, a mood, foreshadowing and all that, and the propulsive nature of story and the readers wanting to know what's going to happen. So once you have that fish and they really want to know what's going to happen, if you've set up your foreshadowing, if you set up the problem of your story deep, urgently enough, excitingly enough, you can do whatever you want. Dostoevsky famously, what they said, he tied a girl to the tracks in the first 50 pages of every novel. So he could go anywhere because you wanted to know which brother killed the father. So he'll take you anywhere. You're in a cell talking to the Grand Inquisitor in Ivan's mind, and you'll go through chapter after chapter after chapter because you know he's going to get back to the murder. Crime and Punishment, he bludgeons the landlady to death in the first 50 pages, and you spend the rest of the book. Is he going to get caught? Is he going to turn himself in? He can go anywhere he wants because I want to know. So if you set your problem up correctly, you have enough urgency that you can describe the world, describe internals, confront important philosophical questions, whatever you need to do. You just have to keep the reader wanting to know what's going to happen next. Here's another question. How do you handle depictions of other ethnic groups in a story of a white woman born at the turn of the century without overstepping into appropriation or stumbling over racial insensitivity? Okay, so this is historical as well, and these people were racist, a lot of them. You just always, if you're writing about an ethnicity that's not yours, a social position that's not yours, a sexual orientation that's not yours, just keep thinking about friends of yours who have or in that group and thinking, what would they think of this? Am I getting it right? Am I getting it wrong? Will people, would my friend, find this both true and interesting? Or would somebody who is having that experience or or is part of that group, would they say this person is full of shit? Or would they say this person did their research, they're familiar? Always pass it by somebody from that group and have them read it and say, well, what do you think? Is this bullshit? Or do you think does it make sense? Do you have any, any objections or questions or things to add? You do your research, you do your homework. All good fiction is not, you can't just make it out of whole cloth. You live in a real world, and there are people out there who've had experiences that are, going to be essential for you. So check, check, check. That's what I have to say. I think I talked about dialogue in using dialogue of other class and ethnic groups. How to handle that, I believe, in dialogue, but if I didn't, the cadence of language and the word choice will help you keep it out of what I call the Pudd'nhead-Wilson Mark Twain problem, where it's so grotesque, it's just parody. A lilt, a kind of sentence construction and word choice will help you. Descriptions of people of different ethnic groups, genders, etc., age groups, and of people in all their multiplicity, has to do with careful observation. Careful observation, no cliches, no cliches. You actually look at people and find the language to describe what you're really seeing in a way that has no not only no stereotype, but more than that, love. Close observation is love. We describe our lovers so carefully because we love everything about them, even things that aren't particularly sightly, but we love that. And to look at other people with the eyes of love and try to describe them from that position is never a bad idea. God, I just saw Alison Neal's, last time I was in New York, 2 times ago, I saw an Alice Neal show curated by Hilton Alls of her neighbors in Harlem, friends and neighbors. And, she saw them so clearly from as individuals, not as members of a group, but as individuals with eyes of love, that they were unique and beautiful. And I'll tell you, I came out of that show and I just looked at it. I was looking at everybody like that. I felt like I was, on drugs or something. And it actually lasted. I mean, that's the effect of great art, is it gives you those eyes. And sometimes you keep it. And you view the world differently. It changes you. That's what great art does. Let's see. How about another question? Okay, I'm curious what rough spots you encounter when writing and how you overcome them. From Alicia. Rough spots I encounter when writing. Well, I just am putting the finishing touches on my new novel, Chimes of a Lost Cathedral. So you go through, you do last minute copy editing and changing, and I had one more chapter that my editor wanted me to go over again, tightening the screws, and the rough things that happen in fiction, whether you're a beginner or whether you're you have 3 novels under your belt or 7 or whatever, it's always the same, that you solve certain problems and you create other problems. So say I am, I don't believe this, that this and this and this would happen. You got to straighten that out. So you straighten that out and you find that you solve that problem, but some of the magic has come out of it. And then, do you sacrifice the magic for the, believability? What about, fiction writing, it's everything is connected. It's all an ecosystem. Your novel or your story is an ecosystem. You change one little thing, you change the whole thing. The flavor, everything changes. And then, so it's all about orchestration, and it's choices, and you give up certain things in favor of other things. And I just constantly tell myself that there's no such thing as perfection in the physical world. You know, the book in your head is seamless, glorious, and without a flaw. But if you take a chance and actually write it, and have the nerve to take something and put it on page for other people to see, it will never ever be as beautiful as what you had pictured in your mind. And that's what breaks your heart. It breaks your heart. But it exists. It wouldn't exist if it had to be perfect. It would never get out of your mind, because that's the only place it's going to be perfect. Trust me. So yes, there are a billion places where rough spots I encounter while writing, a billion. So I just work like a maniac, and then I have to give it up if it's not glorious at every moment. I have to just surrender to that. It's not going to be glorious at every moment, but sometimes it's going to be damn glorious. So I just work. I'm batting for the fence every time. I'm batting for the bleachers. I am never satisfied with a bunt or a punt or all that stuff. No. I want the home run every time. So I'm brutally crushed sometimes because it falls short of the fence. What do you do if those you are working with on a project are not the best fit? Editor, agent, this is a business question. And I usually don't do business questions, but this is a friend, so she asked. What do you do? If you're really feeling that this is undermining your chances of a project succeeding, then you probably will end up moving on. It's usually not even a choice. It just becomes this impulse that can't be resisted anymore. It's like, I just have to get out of this. But sometimes you're working with someone who is doing a pretty good job in certain things and is not very strong in something else, and then you find like a little pinch hitter. You find somebody who can do that little thing that other person can't do, because the other person is able to do things that very few people can do. So you find everybody's strengths. And then you sometimes have to get up there and do it yourself. I can't tell you how many times I've heard writers complain about, they're not doing enough for me. I didn't get to go to this book festival, or they didn't invite me, or my tour, blah, 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 blah. And, I can't say I'm very patient with that kind of complaining, because it's a privilege to be published. It's a privilege to be in that system. And if you have to make up the gap, if you have to, get an informal tour or figure out how to get some publicity for yourself if your publisher doesn't do it. There's so many ways now that people are far more empowered than they ever have been to do some stuff themselves. I don't be baby. Don't wait for somebody else to do it, because they don't. And if your book is your baby, it depends on you. So just roll up your sleeves and do it. Let's see. Okay, plotting essentials. Plotting essentials. I don't plot. I just kind of crawl along on my instincts and sniff. Where is this going? But I always ask myself, what's this thing? What is this? Not always, but as I go along, you start to ask yourself, what is this about? What is this really about? That helps clarify things. A book is made, we're talking about plot. Story is made up of scenes. A short story might be 3 scenes, real-time scenes. We've talked about scene, unity of time and place. Something happens where people can't go back to the way it was before. And if you hold tight to that, you're going to have a plot of some sort. Some sort of plotting essentials, there's a problem, some sort of a problem. Character is in a situation that puts pressure on their own flaws. And they try to find a way out of their situation, and then they realize, oh, my situation is not going to be solved until I deal with some of my inner stuff. That's a character-driven story, and then how does that play out? You're always looking for the change in the protagonist, so that they cannot go back to the way it was before. They go through these scenes and it changes them. And so that's all I do for plotting. I'm not somebody who plots it all out ahead of time. I'd just be bored to tears if I had to do that. I was recently asked if I would do some television writing. And believe me, I was a 60s child, 70s child. I put in my 7 hours a day watching TV. It's not that I'm against television. But I know myself. I don't have that sense of structure that a good screenwriter needs to be a TV writer. Plotting is just not something I do as overtly as you need to do it in the dramatic forms. Love scenes, last question. Love scenes. Any tips on love scenes? Well, we talked a little bit about that, the most important thing is close observation. The more you love somebody, the more you notice things about them. It's not about bodies. This is about love for that human being. And the body is very much a part of it, but it's their body. And you notice the tiniest things about them. Really slow down and really be present on the physical level. All the senses should be involved. The way somebody smells just drives you crazy. I think that when I used to work on American Film Magazine, and I was interviewing Samuel Goldwyn the third. Anyway, it was the 50th anniversary of the release of, I believe it was Gone with the Wind. And so I asked him, what makes for a good romantic scene or a good romantic love story. And he said it's the factors that keep people apart that make for a good love story. It's not when they're together. It's the longing to be together and that complication. I have 2 love stories in Marina M. Well, I have more than 2, I believe. But she has 2 major lovers, and they each reflect a different side of herself. So perhaps a wonderful thing to do in love scenes is to characterize, like, why that lover? Why that love? They're very different. Anybody who's had they're over the age of 30 certainly has had their share of affairs, maybe. And they bring different things out in you. There are different sides of yourself that are conducting those affairs. And that's a really interesting thing. It's like, why this person? What is it? What happens between you that's different from what happens between you and somebody else? And not necessarily one better than the other, although one can be more compelling than the other. Love scenes in terms of sex scenes. I have a fair share of sex scenes. Marina, in the first book, the second book I'm finishing, almost done, has her fair share. She's a young girl exploring, a young, passionate girl exploring life in a very modern society during a revolution. You know, free to do whatever she wants to do. She's making it up as she goes along, and honesty is important to me. And the most important thing is don't part out the body. Body parts don't make love. People make love. You know, he touches you, not his hand touches you. You know, of course there are going to be body parts, but try to keep the body together. That's a big bit of advice for you. And I am so happy that AT&T's gods allowed me to shoot this. And we'll see you next week for writing. Oh, next week I'm doing a Instagram takeover of my publisher Little Brown's Instagram site to celebrate the paperback release of The Revolution of Marina M. So I will be probably doing a Writing Wednesday next time, but I will also be on Instagram all day at littlebrown.com, and God knows what I'm going to be doing. No, not .com, Instagram at Little Brown. So we'll see you next week. All right, thank you. Bye.